I have driven a stage and a freight wagon over the Cedar Wells Road for going on 30 years. And in all that time, the strangest cargo I ever carried was a schoolteacher who came west to marry a hero, and got off my stage to find a man who could not so much as look her in the eye. I have told the tale 100 times in the depot stove's light, and the boys never tire of it, because it is a tale about how the whole of a town can lie to itself out of pure good feeling, and how one plain, honest man can set it all to rights by refusing to be more than he was. The man was Asa Hartwell. You will have heard of him if you were anywhere in the territory in those years, only you will have heard of him wrong. You will have heard of Hartwell the Lionheart, the man who rode into the flooded Pelican single-handed and broke up a band of river thieves, and carried a whole family out of the brown water on his shoulders while the lightning came down. You will have heard he stood off 6 men at the Cedar Wells ford with nothing but his hands and a length of rope, and that the river itself rose up to help him and laid the wicked low. I have heard that one told by a drummer in Kansas who swore he had it from a man who saw it, and I sat there with my coffee and did not say a word, because what was the use? I was the man who saw it. There were no thieves. There was no lightning to speak of. There was a flood, that part is true, and there was a family, and there was a Asa. The rest was sold to the territory like patent medicine, a nickel a bottle, by a print peddler with a wagon full of pamphlets and a tongue that ran like spring melt. But I am getting ahead of myself, the way the boys always say I do. Let me tell it the way it came. Asa kept a little horse outfit out past the creek crossing, a place called the Larkspur for the flowers that ran blue along the bottoms in May. It was not much of a place. A man with more pride than sense would have been ashamed of it, but Asa never had that kind of pride. He had a sodden timber house with one good window, a string of corrals, and the best hand for a green horse I have ever watched work. That was his gift, and it was a quiet one. He could take a colt that 3 men had spoiled with the quirt and the spur, a horse so soured it would lay its ears flat at the sight of a hat, and he could stand in the corral with it for the better part of a week, doing what looked to a watcher like nothing at all, and at the end of that week the horse would follow him around like a pup. He never raised his voice to a horse. I asked him once how he did it, and he thought about it the way he thought about everything, slow and careful, like a man counting coins he could not spare, and he said, "I just let him decide I ain't worth being afraid of." That was Asa all over. He never could see that being not worth fearing was its own kind of strength. He was a plain-made man, neither tall nor short, with a face that did not catch the eye and a way of standing with his shoulders a little rounded, as if he were always half expecting to be told to move along. He had lost his mother young and his father not long after, and he had come up alone in a hard country, and somewhere in all that he had got it fixed in his head that he was a small thing in the world and would always be one. He was past 30 by the time of which I speak, and he had never courted a woman in his life, on account of he could not get a sentence out straight in front of one. I had seen him go red as a branding iron over nothing more than the widow Calloway asking, did he want pie? Now the flood. It came the spring before the spring I am telling about, when the Pelican went over its banks in a night and took out the low crossing. A freighter named Tom Ackerley was caught on the wrong side of it with a loaded wagon and his 2 young ones in the box, his wife being gone these 2 years. The water came up faster than a man could believe. Ackerley's team went down in the current, and the wagon hung up on the old Ford pilings, tipping, with the children screaming, and the whole bank lined with men who could do nothing but holler, because the water was full of trees and fence rails coming down like battering rams, and no horse alive would go into it. No horse but one. Asa had a big plain dun gelding he called Mister, a horse he had made himself out of a colt nobody else would touch, and Asa rode that dun into the brown water without a word to anybody. I was on the bank. I saw it. He did not shout. He did not stand in his stirrups. He did not do any one thing that a man could have made a pamphlet out of. He just went in low over the dun's neck and let the horse pick its footing, and he got a rope on the wagon tongue and snubbed it to his saddle horn and turned that dun and let it pull. And the dun pulled, and the wagon came off the pilings and onto the gravel bar, and Asa carried the little Ackerley girl out first across his saddle and went back for the boy, and then for Tom Ackerley himself, who could not swim a stroke. The whole of it took maybe a quarter hour. When it was done, Asa was the wettest, sorriest-looking thing you ever saw, soaked to the bone, his hat gone down river, sitting that blowing dun and shaking like the horse was, and Tom Ackerley was on his knees in the mud holding his children and weeping, and the men on the bank were cheering fit to bring the sky down. And do you know what Asa did? He looked at all those cheering men like they had caught him doing something to be ashamed of, and he said, low, mostly to the horse, "It was the horse done it, mostly." And he turned and rode home and did not come to town for 3 weeks. That was the deed. That and not a single thing more. But you cannot keep a town from making what it wants out of a thing like that, and what the town wanted, more than it ever knew, was a hero. Cedar Wells was a small dying feeling place in those years, the cattle gone soft in price, and the railroad spur that had been promised hung up somewhere in a financier's pocket, and the people there were hungry for something to be proud of, hungry the way you get hungry for sweet things in a long winter. So they took Asa's quiet quarter hour and they salted it and smoked it and put it up for the season, and by midsummer the story had a band of river thieves in it, and by autumn it had lightning, and by the time the print peddler Lemuel Fry came through with his pamphlet press, the story was ripe and ready, and Fry picked it like an apple off a low branch. Fry was a soft, smiling man who made his living printing up the deeds of frontier heroes, true or otherwise, and selling them back to the country that wanted to believe in them, 10 cents the copy. He took down the Cedar Wells version with great relish, and he asked the saloon and the mercantile and the church social for the particulars, and every man and woman who gave him particulars gave him better ones than the last, because that is how it goes. And Fry wrote it all down and printed it up handsome with a woodcut on the cover of a square-jawed giant on a rearing horse, nothing at all like Asa, and he titled it Hartwell the Lionheart, or The Terror of the Pelican Ford *. And he sold it from here to the Missouri. Asa never knew the half of it. He stayed out at the Larkspur with his horses, and the legend went out into the world and grew like a weed in a fence corner, and that, I would have told you, was the end of the strangeness of it. I would have been wrong, because of Dewitt Combs. Dewitt kept the mercantile, and Dewitt loved Asa like a younger brother, and Dewitt could not abide that a man so good should be so alone. It ate at him. He would stand behind his counter and watch Asa come in for his coffee and his nails and his sack of beans, a man with no one to come home to, and Dewitt's soft heart would near break. So Dewitt, who read the newspapers and saw the advertisements in them, took it into his head to find Asa a wife. There were notices in the back of the papers in those days, women back east seeking a frontier match, men out here seeking the same, the loneliness of a whole country trying to find itself across 2,000 miles of paper. Dewitt answered one of them on Asa's behalf, without a word to Asa, which was a liberty, but Dewitt meant it kindly, the way men do the worst of their meddling. The notice he answered had been placed by a Miss Verena Ashcombe, of a town in Ohio, schoolteacher, 1820, of sound character, seeking correspondence with a man of steady habits and good heart with a view toward matrimony in the West. That was all the notice said. It was a plain, honest notice placed by a plain, honest woman, and if Dewitt had answered it plain and honest, my tale would have no point to it. But Dewitt could not. He sat down to write as Asa, and he found that his pen would not write the plain truth, which was that Asa was a shy, poor horsebreaker who could not say 2 words to a woman. His pen wanted to do Asa justice, and the only Asa the country knew any more was the Lionheart. So Dewitt wrote her letters, signed Asa Hartwell, and in those letters Asa Hartwell was a man of the frontier of some renown, modest about it but unmistakable, a man who had done a brave thing at a river once and been written up in a book over it, a man with a fine outfit and a heart that had waited a long while for the right woman. He did not lie outright, you understand. He just let the legend do his courting for him, the way the whole town had let the legend do its dreaming. And Miss Verena Ashcombe wrote back, and the letters went to and fro across the country for the better part of a winter, Dewitt answering each one at his counter after the store was closed, sweating over the words, and never once telling a thing about it. The truth came out the way truth mostly does, all at once and at the worst time. It came out the day Dewitt got the letter that said Miss Ashcombe had sold her things and given up her position and would arrive on the spring stage to be married, as had been agreed. I have rarely seen a man as gray-faced as Dewitt Combs was the day he carried that letter out to the Larkspur. I drove him out myself, for he was in no condition to drive, and I sat on the wagon seat while Dewitt confessed the whole of it to Asa in the corral, and I watched Asa's face go from confusion to understanding to a kind of stillness that was worse than anger, and I heard Asa say, very quiet, the way he talked to a scared horse, "Dewitt, what have you done?" Dewitt wept. He said he had only wanted Asa to have somebody. He said the woman sounded fine and good and not foolish, and that maybe it would all come right. And Asa stood there in the corral with the dun nosing at his shoulder, and he looked off across the blue-flowered bottoms toward the place the road came in, and he said the thing I have never forgotten, the thing that tells you the whole of the man. He said, "You've gone and made her love a lie, Dewitt. Now somebody's got to go tell her the truth, and it had best be me, and it had best be the first thing I say to her, because everything after that has got to be true or it ain't worth the having." And that is how it came that I drove Miss Verena Ashcombe in from the railhead on a bright cold spring morning to meet the famous Asa Hartwell, the terror of the Pelican Ford, the Lionheart of the territory, and how the man who met her stage was the plainest, most miserable, most honest horsebreaker in the West, holding his hat in both hands like it was the only thing keeping him upright. I had her on the seat beside me the last 15 miles, for the inside of the coach was full of a drummer and his cases, and so I had the chance to take her measure before ever she laid eyes on Asa, and I will tell you my first measure of her was that Dewitt had done better than he had any right to, and worse, both at once. She was no beauty in the way the woodcut on Fry's pamphlet would have wanted, no soft, helpless thing waiting to be carried out of a river. She was a tall, straight-sitting woman with a strong, plain face and quick gray eyes that took in the whole country as we drove, the grass and the far buttes and the hawks turning and missed nothing. She was not afraid of the size of the land, which most Eastern folk are. She asked me good questions, about the soil and the water and the winters and the school, and she listened to the answers, which most folk do not. She had a way of saying a dry thing with a perfectly straight face that took me a mile to catch up to. When the drummer inside the coach commenced to brag through the window about a deal he had made, she caught my eye and said, mild as milk, "How fortunate the country is to be so improved by gentlemen passing through it," and I near drove off the road laughing. So I knew, before ever we came in sight of Cedar Wells, that here was a woman with both feet on the ground and a clear eye in her head, and I knew that the legend the town had sold her was going to meet that clear eye and not survive it, and I confess my stomach was in a knot the last few miles, for Asa's sake. I did not say a word of it to her. It was not mine to say. We came over the last rise and the town lay below us, such as it was, and Miss Ashcombe sat up a little and put her hand to her hair without seeming to know she did it, the only sign she gave that her heart was anything but steady, and she said, half to herself, "Well, here is the famous Cedar Wells." And there was something in how she said *famous that told me she was not near so sure of her legend as her letters had been, that some doubt had been working in her on the long road. And I thought, she is braver than the man who is waiting for her, and that is saying a good deal, because the man who is waiting for her is the bravest fool I know. Half the town had turned out at the depot. Of course they had. The Lionheart was getting married, and they had all helped court her in a manner of speaking, every soul who had ever told Fry a tall tale, and they had come to see the bride. They had got up a little bunting on the depot rail, and the church ladies had a table of cakes, and there in the front of them, in his one good coat, gray to the lips, stood Asa Hartwell holding his hat in both hands. Beside him stood Dewitt Combs, sweating in the cold, looking like a man at his own hanging. I brought the team to a stand and set the brake, and the crowd hushed the way a crowd does, and Miss Verena Ashcombe looked down off the high seat at the men gathered there, looking for her hero, and I watched her eyes go along the front rank of them, the big rancher Pell and the blacksmith Hooley and a couple of cowhands who fancied themselves, all of them grand-looking next to Asa, and I watched her eyes pass right over Asa, twice, hunting, before they came back to him and stopped. Because he was the only one looking at her like his life was ending, and a woman knows. She knew. You could see her put it together in a breath, the gray face, the twisting hat, the way he could not hold her eye, and you could see the legend die in her, quiet, the way the lightning died out of the true story. Asa stepped forward. The whole town leaned in. And I want you to understand what it cost him, what he did then, because it was the bravest thing I ever saw a man do, braver than the river. For in the river he had a good horse under him, and in this he had nothing but the bare truth and his own two shaking hands. He did not bow, nor make a pretty speech, nor put out his hand to help her down like a gentleman in a book. He looked up at her on that high seat in front of the whole staring town, and he said, in a voice that carried because the day was so still, "Ma'am, my name is Asa Hartwell, and I have got to tell you a thing before you come down off that wagon, because if I don't tell it now I never will, and then it'll be too late to be honest, and I won't start that way." You could have heard a feather hit the dust. "There's no thieves," Asa said. "There never was, there's no lightning in it. There's no book worth the reading. I am not the man in that pamphlet, ma'am. I'm a poor horsebreaker that pulled a family out of a high creek one time with a good horse, and the town has made the rest of it up out of wanting something, and a friend of mine." And here he did not so much as glance at Dewitt, would not shame him before the crowd. "A friend of mine wrote you those letters meaning kindly, and let you think I was that man, and I never knew of it till 3 days ago, and I have not slept since. You have come a long way for a hero, and there isn't one. There's just me. I've got the fare for you to go back, and a little besides for the trouble we've put you to, and a room at the hotel that's paid for as long as you need it, and an apology I don't have the words to make big enough. And that's the truth, and it's the first thing I've said to you, and I'm sorry it had to be that." And then he stood there. He did not run, though I think he wanted to. He stood there in front of the whole town with the legend lying dead at his feet and waited to be despised. Now I have thought a great deal over the years about what most women would have done, set down in a strange country in front of 200 staring strangers, and told that the marriage they had crossed a continent for was built on a lie. Most would have wept, and who could blame them? Some would have raged. Some would have fled into the hotel and never come out till the next stage east. And the town, which had so loved its legend, half wanted her to weep, I think, for it would have made a fine sad story to tell, and they were already a little sorry to lose the grand one. Verena Ashcombe did none of those things. She sat very still up on that seat for a long moment, and I, being beside her, was the only one close enough to see that her hands were gripped together so hard the knuckles stood white, the only sign of what it cost her too. And then she did a thing that I have loved her for ever since, and that told me, that very first minute, that she was the rightest woman in the whole world for the wrongest legend in it. She laughed, not unkindly, not at him. It came up out of her like relief, like a window thrown open in a close room, one short astonished laugh, and she put her hand to her mouth, and she looked down at that plain, shaking, honest man, and she said, loud enough for the front rank to hear, "Mr. Hartwell, do you mean to tell me that I have come 2,000 miles, and the only thing waiting for me at the end of it is an honest man?" The town did not know what to make of that. Asa did not either. He blinked up at her. "Because I will tell you, sir," she went on, and now she stood up on the high seat, all her plain straight height, and addressed not just Asa but the whole gawping crowd, the rancher Pell and the church ladies and Lemuel Fry's whole printed country. "I read that pamphlet on the train. A gentleman lent it me, and by the 3rd page I had begun to dread the man in it, for he sounded a great fool, all teeth and thunder, and I thought, I have sold my furniture to marry a tall tale and serve me right. I had quite made up my mind to be disappointed, and here you have gone and disappointed me the other way entirely by being a true thing instead of a grand one." She looked down at him. "Help me down off this wagon, Mr. Hartwell. We have a great deal to talk over, you and we cannot do it with me up here and the whole county listening." I will not soon forget Asa Hartwell's face as he stepped up and offered his hand, and she came down off my wagon and stood before him in the dust of the Cedar Wells street. The two of them, a head apart and both of them plain as bread, and neither one of them anything at all like the woodcut. Nor will I forget the town, which had come to cheer a legend and got instead the only thing better, two honest people meeting honest, and did not, for a wonder, have the first idea what to do about it. That was the start of it. You would think that would be the end, the lie confessed, the truth out, the woman staying. But a lie that a whole town has fed and watered for a year does not lie down and die just because the one honest man at the heart of it told the truth. The town wanted its legend back, and there was a man in Cedar Wells who wanted it more than any, and meant to make money of it, and his name was Orrin Stagg. Stagg had come to Cedar Wells 2 years before with a good coat and a leather case full of papers, and a smile that never reached above his cheeks. He called himself a land agent, and he was buying up town lots and bottom land quiet and cheap, working on the certainty that the railroad spur was coming, which he seemed to know more about than honest men did. He had bought poor Tom Ackerley's bottom for a song after the flood, when Ackerley was wrecked and willing to sell, and he had bought out 2 or 3 others the same way, men caught short. And Orrin Stagg had looked at Asa Hartwell's legend the way Lemuel Fry had, as an apple on a low branch, only Stagg meant to make a good deal more than 10 cents of it. For here was Stagg's reasoning, and I had it later from his own clerk, who left his service in disgust over the whole business. The railroad, when it came, would put its depot and its yards wherever the town gave it the best inducement and the best name. And a town with a famous man in it, a hero out of a book, a town that could call itself the home of Hartwell the Lionheart, that was a town the railroad and the settlers and the newspapers would notice. Stagg meant to get up a grand celebration, a Cedar Wells Hero Days, with Asa at the head of it, and use it to draw a crowd and a write-up, and most of all, to sell the town lots he had bought cheap to the buyers the noise would bring. The legend was money to Orrin Stagg, and the truth was a thief trying to take it out of his pocket. And from the morning Asa stood up on my wagon and told it, Stagg was Asa's enemy, though Asa, being Asa, did not know he had one for a good while yet. But I am running ahead again. Let me tell first how the courting went, for it is the heart of the thing, and the rest is only the trouble that tried to spoil it. Verena did not go back east. She did not marry Asa that week either, mind. She was far too sensible for that, having just learned what came of trusting letters. What she did was take the room at the hotel that Asa had paid for and announce, to do its everlasting relief and the church lady's everlasting scandal, that she would stay a season and see, on her own money as soon as she had any, and that she would not be hurried nor herded by anybody. And then she did a thing nobody expected, least of all the town. She found out that Cedar Wells had no proper teacher, the last one having married a cattle buyer and gone to Denver. And within the week she had the school, 20-odd children of every size in a one-room building with a stove that smoked, and she had them reading by the end of the month, the ones who had never read, and she had the big rough boys who had run off 2 teachers before sitting up straight and minding, for she had a way with a hard case not so different from Asa's way with a soured colt. She did not raise her voice. She just let them decide she was not worth defying. I have thought since that the 2 of them were the same kind of person, gentle and unbendable both at once, and that each of them had spent a life believing nobody would ever see the worth in that, and that was the true thing that drew them, under all the foolishness of the legend. Asa courted her the only way he knew, which was to be useful and honest in there. He could not make speeches, but he could mend the school stove so it did not smoke, and he did. And he could see that her woodbox was filled, and it was, And one of the rough boys never did know that the gentling that turned him from a bully into a decent lad came as much from the quiet horsebreaker who took him out to the larkspur on Saturdays as from the teacher who would not raise her voice. Asan never told her he had done it. She found it out, the way she found everything out, and she did not say anything either, but I saw her look at him across the church social one evening when she thought no one watched, and there was a thing in that look that no woodcut ever drew. She went out to the larkspur, too, which the church ladies thought very forward and which she did anyway, for she had not crossed a continent to be told where she might walk. She watched him work a horse. She told me about it after, and I have always remembered how she put it. She said, "Mr. Crane, I have read a great many books about brave men, and I begin to think they were all written by people who never saw a brave thing." I watched him stand in that pen for 2 hours with a horse that wanted to kill him and do nothing, and let the horse find out it was wrong about him. There is more courage in that nothing than in all the lightning in that wretched pamphlet. And then she said, more quiet, "He does not think he is worth a thing, you know. He thinks the town made him up out of nothing because there was nothing there to begin with. Somebody has got to tell him there was something there all along, and that it was better than the lie." She looked at me. I expect that somebody had better be me. So you see how it stood, by the height of that summer. The honest man and the clear-eyed woman had found each other under the wreck of the legend, and were courting slow and true, and the whole thing would have come to a happy and uneventful wedding by autumn, I have no doubt, if it had not been for Orin Stagg and his hero days. Stagg moved careful. He did not come at Asa straight, for he had taken Asa's measure and knew that an honest man cannot be bought and is dangerous to push. He came at the town instead. He got up a committee of the leading men, the ranchers and the merchants, and he laid out his plan with maps and figures, a grand 3-day celebration to put Cedar Wells on the map, with the famous Hartwell honored at the center of it, a parade, a barbecue, a platform with speeches, and not so loud, a great sale of choice town lots to the visitors the fame would bring. He did not say that the lots were his, bought cheap. He let the leading men think the prosperity would be theirs. And the leading men, hungry as ever for the town to be something, signed on to it with a will, and the church ladies got up committees, and the bunting that had welcomed the bride came out again, and Cedar Wells worked itself into a fever over hero days. And not one soul among them stopped to think that the hero himself had stood up on a wagon in the spring and told them plainly there was no hero at all. That is the thing about a town that wants to believe something. Asa had told them the truth right out loud, every word of it, the no thieves and the no lightning and the just me, and they had heard it, and they had simply decided, in the soft, secret way a crowd decides things, not to let it be true. It was easier to keep the legend. The legend gave them a barbecue and a parade and a hope of the railroad. The truth gave them only a quiet horsebreaker they had known all along and never thought twice about. So they kept the legend, in the teeth of the man's own word, and they came to Asa not to ask would he be their hero, but to thank him for being it, which is a harder thing to refuse. Asa was sick over it. I drove out to the larkspur more than once that summer to find him standing at his corral fence not working, just standing, which was a bad sign in him, and the third time I asked him what he meant to do, and he said, "Hollies, I told them the truth. I told them to their faces. What's a man to do when he's told the truth and they won't have it? Do I tell it louder? They'll only think I'm modest and love me the more for it." He shook his head. "It's like trying to give back a gift nobody'll take their hands off of. Every time I push it back at them, they push it on me harder." It was Verena who saw the shape of the danger and Verena who named it. She came to me one evening at the depot, brisk as always, and she said, "Mr. Crane, you have lived here longer than anyone I trust. Tell me about this Stagg. Where did he get the lots he is so eager to sell?" I told her. I told her about the flood and Tom Ackerley's bottom sold for a song and the 2 or 3 others caught short, and the railroad spur that Stagg seemed to know more of than he ought. And I watched her clear gray eyes go cold and bright the way they did over a sum that did not add up, and she said, "So the celebration is not to honor the man. It is to fatten the lots, And the man is the bait. She was quiet a moment. He has taken Assa's one true brave thing, the one thing Assa is most ashamed to be praised for, and he means to use it to cheat the very people Assa pulled out of the river. That family, the Ackerleys, they lost their land to this man. She stood up. Assa will not stand for that once he sees it whole, but he must see it whole, and he must be the one to undo it before the whole town, or they will never let the legend go. It is not enough for him to refuse to be a hero. He has got to be a true one once plainly, where they can all see the difference. I did not know then what she meant by that last. I'm not sure she did either. But the thing about a true brave deed is that you cannot plan it. It comes when it comes, out of a flood or a runaway, and it asks a man a question he has got one breath to answer, and the answer tells the whole town in a heartbeat what a year of pamphlets could not. The day it came was the first day of Hero Days, and I was there, and I will tell it just as it fell. They had got the town up grand. The main street was strung with bunting and packed with people, our own folk and a great crowd of strangers drawn by stags' handbills, which had gone out for 50 miles promising the famous Hartwell and a fine investment both. There was a platform built at the head of the street, draped in red, with chairs for the leading men and a great chair in the middle for Assa, who had refused to sit in it and been told he was being modest and made to sit in it anyway. There was a brass band that played the same 3 tunes. There were stags' lot maps pinned up on a board by the platform, with a clerk taking names. And the strangers walked up and down with money in their pockets and their heads full of the Lionheart, ready to buy a piece of a town with a hero in it. Assa sat in that great chair on the platform looking like a man laid out for burial. Verena stood at the foot of the platform steps in her good dress, watching not the parade but the crowd, the way she watched a hard class, waiting. I had my freight team standing in their traces down the street a ways, a heavy 6-up hitched to a loaded wagon, for I had brought in goods that morning and not yet unhitched, and I was up on the seat watching the show, and so I was looking right at it when it began. It was a small thing that started it, the way it always is. Down at the far end of the street, past the platform, a fool of a stranger touched off a string of firecrackers to add to the festivity, right behind a span of mules hitched to a buckboard. The mules went up and over and bolted, and the buckboard came down the packed street empty, the driver thrown clear in the first jump, the mules running blind and wild straight into the thickest of the crowd, and the crowd screaming and breaking every way, and there in the middle of the street, frozen, was the little Ackerley girl, the same child Assa had carried out of the river, 8 years old now and out in the open where her father could not get to her through the crush, directly in the path of the runaway. Now I want you to mark what happened, for it is the whole of my tale in half a minute. Up on the red platform, the leading men shouted and pointed. Orrin Stagg stood up and called out for somebody to do something, his voice high. The crowd heaved and screamed and got in its own way. And in the great chair in the middle of it all sat Hartwell the Lionheart, the terror of the Pelican Ford, the famous hero of 50 miles of handbills, and not one of those grand men on that platform, not one, moved. Assa was already gone. He had not waited for the screaming. He had been up and off the front of the platform before the firecrackers stopped popping, off the 6-foot drop without using the steps, and he hit the street running, and I saw him do the thing he had done in the river, the thing that was the truth of him, which was that he did not run at the child, which would have done no good. A man cannot outpull a runaway with his hands. He ran at the mules. He cut across at an angle low, the way he came at a green horse, and he did not shout. In all that screaming he did not make a sound that I could hear, and he got a hand on the near mule's headstall as it came past, and he let it take him off his feet and swing him, and he hung there with his whole weight on that mule's head and turned it, by main strength, and by some understanding of the animal that no other man in that street had, turned the team off its line not 3 feet from the child, so that the buckboard slewed and went over on its side in the dust and skidded harmless past, and the mules came around in a tangle and stood blowing, and Assa stood up out of the dust with the near mule's headstall still in his fist, holding it quiet, talking to it low, the same as he had talked to the dun in the river. his coat torn off one shoulder and his good hat gone and blood on his hand where the strap had cut him. And the little Ackerley girl, untouched, ran to him and grabbed him round the waist. And Tom Ackerley came tearing out of the crowd and fell on the both of them, weeping, the same as he had wept on the riverbank, and the street went dead silent, and then it did not. It came up like the river coming up, the cheering, but it was a different cheering than the legend had ever got. It had something in it that the pamphlet cheering never had, because every soul on that street had just seen, with their own eyes, the difference between the men who sat in the grand chairs and the man who went to the mule's head. They had seen the truth Asa had been trying to give them all summer, and they could not give it back this time, because it had happened in front of them, and there was no woodcut between them and it. But the thing I have carried longest from that day is not the rescue, brave as it was. It is what came after, the part Verena had said had to happen, the part where the true man undoes the lie in the open. For when the cheering had gone on a while, the leading men got their feet back under them and crowded down off the platform, and Orrin Stagg got there first, beaming his cheek smile, his clerk behind him, and he took Asa by the bloody hand and pumped it and turned him to face the crowd and the strangers with their money, and he cried out, "Behold him, the Lionheart! Did I not promise you a hero, friends? Now you have seen it. And every man who would live in a town with such a man among us, the lots, friends, the choice lots." And Asa Hartwell took his bloody hand back out of Orrin Stagg's grip. He stepped up onto the overturned buckboard so they could all see him, the torn coat and the cut hand and the plain face, and he held up that hand for quiet, and he got it, for they would give him anything now. And he said, in that voice that carried, because he made no effort to make it carry, "I'll say it once more, and this time I expect you'll hear it since you just watched it. There's no Lionheart. There's no thieves at any river. There's a man, hear me, that's good with animals and not much else, and that's the whole of it, and I'm done being ashamed of it because it appears it's enough. I went to that mule because I know mules, the way I knew that flood, and any man here that knew them as well would have done the same, and the only reason none of you did is you didn't know how, and there's no shame in that and no glory in my knowing. That's not a hero. That's a horsebreaker. You've been cheering a horsebreaker all summer and calling him a lion, and I'd take it kindly if you'd quit." He let that sit. The strangers with their money shifted, and then Asa turned and looked at Orrin Stagg, and his voice changed, and for the only time in all the years I knew him, there was an edge on it. "And as for the lots," Asa said, "I'd have every stranger here know whose land this town is selling under my name. This man bought near half of it cheap off folks the flood ruined, that same flood you've made me a hero over. He bought Tom Ackerley's bottom for next to nothing while Tom was wrecked, the same Tom whose girl I just took out from under those mules, the same girl I took out of the river that started the whole tale. You're being sold a town with a hero in it. What you're really being sold is the misfortune of good people, dressed up in a story, and the man dressing it up means to pocket the profit. I'd think hard before I bought a foot of it." You never heard such a silence and then such a noise. For the strangers were not fools with their money, only hopeful, and the difference between a hero town and a swindle is a thing a hopeful man wants very much to know before he buys, and they turned on Stagg with their questions, and Stagg's smile came off his face at last, all the way off, and underneath it was just a frightened, greedy man, which is what had been there the whole time. And the leading men of Cedar Wells, who had let themselves be led, looked at Stagg's lot maps and at Tom Ackerley holding his rescued girl, and at the horsebreaker standing on a busted buckboard telling them the plain truth. And they had the grace, most of them, to be ashamed, which is the beginning of becoming honest again. It came apart for Stagg fast after that. With the thing said out loud in front of so many, other men found their tongues, and it came out how he had known of the railroad's plans before honest men, and how he had used the flood, and within the month there were lawyers in it, and within the season Orrin Stagg had sold out at a loss and left Cedar Wells, and the bottom land he had taken from Tom Ackerley came back to Tom, for the sale was shown to have been worked crooked, and that, more than the mules or even the river, was the deed of a Saz that Tom Ackerley never could speak of without his eyes going wet. The railroad spur came 2 years later as it happened, and the town did fine by it, honest, without any legend at all, which I have always thought is the way a Sa would have wanted it written, if anybody had thought to write it, which of course nobody did, the truth making such a poor pamphlet. But you want to know about the wedding, for that is what the boys always want when I tell it, and it is right that you should, for it is the true end of the thing. Verena married a Sa in the autumn, in the smoky little schoolhouse she had made warm, with the stove he had mended drawing clean, and the children she had taught in their best clothes, and Tom Ackerley's girl scattering blue larkspur down the aisle that she had dried from the larkspur bottoms herself, and Dewitt Combs standing up beside a Sa with the proudest, most forgiven face you ever saw, for a Sa had forgiven him long since, having understood from the first that Dewitt's only crime was loving him too well to tell the truth, which is a crime a Sa could not hold against anybody, being so guilty of loving the same way himself. She did not take his name and lay down her own life and become a thing kept at the larkspur. That was never in her, and a Sa would not have wanted it if it had been, for he had not fallen in love with a soft thing to be carried out of a river. She kept the school. They built onto the larkspur house a good room for it in the bad weather months, and in fair weather she kept the town school, and the larkspur had a teacher and a horsebreaker for its keepers and a great deal of laughing in it, more than that plain house had heard in all the lonely years before. She kept her own money and her own mind and her own say, and a Sa would no more have crossed her in the running of the school than she would have crossed him in the gentling of a horse, each of them honoring the other's craft, which is, I have come to think, as good a thing to build a marriage on as ever I have seen built on anything. And the legend, you ask? The pamphlet Hartwell the Lionheart asterisk, the terror of the Pelican Ford. It is still out there somewhere in the bottoms of trunks and the backs of drawers, 10 cents the copy, and now and again to this day a stranger will come through Cedar Wells with one and ask after the great man, and we send them out to the larkspur, and they go expecting the lightning and the thieves, and they find a gray-haired horsebreaker in a corral with a colt, doing what looks like nothing at all, and a tall schoolteacher calling the children in to supper, and they go away disappointed, every one. The way Verena was supposed to be disappointed that first day on my wagon and never was. And I have thought, watching them go, that the disappointment is the whole of the point, and that the country is so hungry for grand men that it cannot see when a good one is standing right in front of it, plain as bread, holding a colt's lead and a woman's love, having got the only 2 true things a man can get and never once been written up in a book over it. I drove the stage that brought her west, the day she came to marry a hero. I have told you the truth of what she found instead. She found an honest man, and she was glad of it, and she chose him with her eyes open in the dust of the street, no legend left between them, and that, I have come to believe in my old age, is the only kind of choosing that ever holds. The grand ones in the pamphlets choose lightning. The good ones, the ones that last, they get off the wagon and look the plain truth in the face and laugh for gladness and stay. She stayed. They are out at the larkspur yet, the both of them gone gray, the blue flowers coming up in the bottoms every May the way they always have, and if you ride out that way of a Saturday you will find no hero there at all, only the best 2 people I ever knew, which is so much better than a hero that I have never understood why the whole world does not see it. But then, that is the world for you. It wants the lightning. It would not know the larkspur if it bloomed at its feet. It bloomed at mine. I am glad I knew to look down.